Okay, hi everybody. I'm Jeff Mayer from WisPolitics.com and WisBusiness.com. I want to welcome you today to our sustainable farming event. Really appreciate you coming here to Fox Valley Tech and the Bordini Center. It's a wonderful facility. We're not holding mics because the mics are in the ceiling, so it's the highest of technology. We have somebody patched in via Zoom who will be part of the panel. So want to thank our sponsors, first of all, for this event. We couldn't do it without the sponsors. DTE Vantage, Renew Wisconsin Energy Fund, and the Wisconsin Farm Bureau. So thank you very much to the sponsors, and thank you very much to Bob and Peter. So on your tables is a copy of our one printed publication. We're an online digital news organization, but we do one printed product a year, and this is it. So in your hands is the annual directory. So it has all the numbers for elected officials in the state, and it has a election preview since this is a big election year. So to welcome us to Fox Valley Tech is Rayon Brown. He's the Vice President for Student Services. Welcome, Rayon.
So I don't get much printed stuff anymore, so I'm going to grab one of these. And I must say, this feels good to be welcoming people in person to Fox Valley Tech. This is the core of who we are and how we do business. We're a technical college, and seeing people in our building engaging in conversations like this warms our heart because it lends to our mission. And without people in our building, sometimes we question whether or not we're fulfilling our mission to our community and our workforce partners. So thank you for journeying here today, no matter how far you're coming from or how close, and thanks for engaging in this conversation. On the behalf of Dr. Matheny, our president, and our board of trustees, and our other executive team members and college leadership, we would like to welcome you to Fox Valley Tech. For those of you who are not aware of who we are, we're one of the premier education institutions in the state, one of the third larger technical colleges in the state of Wisconsin that offers over 200 programs for students to engage in order to change their life for the better. And the work that we do is sustainable, cutting edge, and is on the cusp of changing what Wisconsin needs to do in order to ensure that our community is positioned to lead not just our region, but the state and our country. So this is exciting for us again. And, we're talking about ag and thanks for lunch. And, if you're not picking it up by now, I have a little accent, so I'm from Jamaica. And where I'm from in Jamaica is the food basket of the country, and that's why I love Wisconsin, because Wisconsin reminds me of home. We have hard-working people who gets down and dirty to make sure that the rest of us are having what we want to eat, and doing it in a way that is engaging and innovative to our community. And the first time that I engaged in an ag program at Fox Valley Tech, I actually went to Cow College. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to Cow College in Fox Valley Tech, but you can ask Sarah or somebody else about that a little bit later. So thank you guys for engaging in these conversations. And again, if you have any need as it relates to any type of educational offerings or anything specific to what it is that you're discussing today, don't hesitate to reach out to a member of our team. We're here to help, and we're here to continue to advance your mission and to advance the work that you hope to do. And again, welcome, and I hope you have a great time. And it's great to see faces and people and warm bodies in seats. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks so much. Fox Valley Tech has been super helpful in making all the arrangements for this, so thank you to you, Rayon, and your team. Really appreciate it. Yo, get your More of those available if you want. All right, so now I'm going to turn things over to Pam Jahnke. I don't think she even needs an introduction, but if everybody knows Pam, right? All right, Pam, here you are.
All right, thanks. Thank you again, everybody, for God bless that we're traveling today instead of yesterday, or it would have been me, myself, and I'm afraid, helping to conduct this forum. So the discussion today is going to be pretty free-flowing. The part that I'm concerned about are the microphones are all in the ceiling. So if you hear me super projecting, I talk loud to begin with, but I'm also targeting that speaker with the green light, and then there's another one in the back. So if you decide that you want to pose a question to any of our panelists today, you are more than welcome to do that, but I will ask you to speak up. Outside voices inside today, and I may repeat your question if there's something that the speaker, our guest, did not hear. And feel free to wander around. That lunch is back there. You know as well as I do, we don't want to see them throwing out food, so don't be hesitating to go back and grab some chips or another sandwich or anything like that. That's why it's there. Like I said, I really appreciate you being here. Brief introduction opportunity for our panelists today. Everybody basically is pretty familiar to this audience, I'm sure. I'll start out with the gentleman that's to my right, who is very recognizable. Randy Romanski, of course, is our Wisconsin Secretary of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. I've talked with Randy prior to this, and he will be sharing with us just a little insight into farmer-led watershed groups that have been around for more than a decade in many areas of the state. Randy, you've got a vested interest in that phrase, sustainability for Wisconsin agriculture.
Okay, now we do. Thanks, Pam. And the quick introduction is enough, I think. And Pam's right. The things we're going to talk about that we all bring to the table are combining our climate change and sustainability. We talked to our policymaking board a couple of years ago and said, hey, what are you thinking about climate change? And all of them, it's a group of people who are representing a wide array of the industry, said it'd be pretty hard to look at what's going on right now and think that our world isn't changing around us, that our climate isn't different than it was years ago. And some of those years are not too far gone. The thing, though, that we like to point out to is farmers adapt. They always have, they always will, and they'll continue to. Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection sees itself as a resource to the industry to try to make sure that we can help them adapt and work alongside them, provide resources where able, and have them be the solution to climate change that we believe they are. So, Pam's right, we're going to focus on the ground and water. I'm going to talk a lot about soil and water health, because we're talking about big picture items here that are going to range across a variety of topics. Clearly, digesters and carbon is going to be part of it. But I think that conversation starts at the ground level. That's why we want to talk about what farmers are doing on the ground to conserve soil, have healthier soil and water, and how that contributes to how we talk about monetizing carbon and monetizing and scaling digesters. So cool. There we go.
Thanks, Randy. And next, I kind of want to jump to the other end of the table so you understand how I'm envisioning the program rollout. Sarah Moss-Payton is joining us today. She's one of the staff members here at Fox Valley Tech College. She's the farm business and farm production management instructor. And Sarah, we come up with all these great plans, these great ideas, but let's face it, if farmers do not adopt and adapt, it's all for naught. Sarah, you are out there dealing with farmers on a day-to-day basis, making production decisions, and you're going to basically address the number one questions that you're getting on these kinds of systems, correct?
Absolutely. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Farm Business and Production Management Program, we are not here on campus here in Appleton. We are a program that goes out to the farms. We work with them one-on-one on their business goals, their financials, et cetera. So we do a lot of farm financial analysis and benchmarking. So we're benchmarking them against some of their peers here in the state and in the nation.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. We're glad that you can join us. Next, I'm going to move kind of to the technology side of things, because as I was visiting over lunch, one thing we really want people to do is toss out that idea of what they imagine as a digester from 20 years ago. Technology today is very sophisticated. Two great people that can help address that. Steve Dvorak is the president of DVO in Chilton. They are designers of these digesters. And Steve, I'm not overstating, technology has evolved and changed at a fairly rapid pace in your world, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. digesters have been along for a long, long time, over 100 years, mostly municipalities. Kim Bay was sitting in the back here, and I worked at Appleton Packing as consultants and installers in 1985 when we put in the digester there. I would say it's still running, but I hate to tell you how many millions and millions of BTUs they produced at Packland and that they've run in the plant. But it didn't work the way it was designed to work. We could handle water, couldn't handle solids, couldn't handle very heavy material, and in some ways we were disappointed with it. So we've gotten past that. We're now handling the material that they couldn't handle in 1985. We're handling heavy cow manure, poultry manure, a lot of food waste and so forth, so that technology is there. Personally, we've been doing it since 2001 in the state of Wisconsin, and we now have about 120 digesters worldwide that are running on some heavy waste, making a lot of gas. And we started off 2001, everything went to electricity. So we ran a lot of engines. That evolved to going into the pipeline and making renewable compressed natural gas. It evolved simply because of economics. Same biogas, but we were able to scrub it, put it in the gas. California did everybody in Wisconsin dairy industry a huge favor, paid a lot of money for it. So you can thank California for that. The federal program allowed us into the federal program as well. So now it's all going to renewable natural gas because the economics favor that over electricity by about a factor of 10 to 1. You get about 10 times more money for the same gas going into the renewable natural gas as we used to get from electricity. And is that the end of it? No. If you look at today's paper, the price of natural gas in Europe in the form of LNG and natural gas is unbelievable compared to what we're getting. Some of it's Ukraine, of course, some of it's not. We set a record this week about LNG going to Europe from the United States. They pay a lot more for renewable LNG. But where do you think, I'm anticipating where the next market's going to be? It will only be there if it pays more than California, by the way. It's the way the world is. We also have people in this state, the university system, that are working on Fisher-Tropsch process that will take it straight to diesel fuel. That's being done in this state right now on a piloting basis. And I'm pretty excited about that. We have people that are making chemicals from it. DME is being made and so forth that can act as a fuel additives and so forth, so there's a lot of things happening. But at the end of the day, what's really important is that we're taking methane, which farmers are getting a lot of stones and arrows thrown at them for producing. I always like to remind people that we've got a lot of cows, but when we came here, there was a lot more buffaloes who are the same anaerobic digesters than there are cows today. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking about that as an engineer, trying to figure out where's the rationale to all of this. So same animal, same type of gut system. But it is there when we take the renewable energy and we take the methane that would naturally go up in the air. We are doing carbon sequestration. We can do that. There's also technology out there. North Dakota now has approved the first, I believe the first one in the United States, where they're taking the CO2 and injecting it into old wells. We could do that in Wisconsin. When we scrub the natural gas to put in a pipeline, one of the results of that is almost pure CO2. In fact, we could put into the pipeline very, very easily. North Dakota paying for that, another income source. At the end of the day, I have a lot of customers that have been running digesters for 10, 15 years on their farm that are telling us their gas now is worth 3 to 4 times their real profit.
Well,
True story.
That's-
Absolutely.
that's what we want to, that's what we kind of want to keep our eye on. That's where the conversation needs to lie. Next up, thanks, Steve, by the way. Jessica, Niekrasz?
Niekrasz, yes.
Niekrasz. She's the president of Clean Fuel Partners. She's also the board chair for the Wisconsin Biomass Energy Coalition. She's been entrenched in the industry basically your entire career, right, kiddo? And now really evolved onto the policy development side, helping everybody get on the same page with that advanced technology that Steve just described and the buy-in for communities and as well as energy companies. Tell us a little bit more on where you're training your eye these days, Jessica.
Yeah, we're focused on policy that would create an additional revenue stream for farms, for animal ag. It's a voluntary market. Gary will talk more to this specifically, but there's a lot of opportunities in the state. You know, the dairy industry has consolidated over the years, and for economic reasons, and you know, we enjoy the byproduct of that in fair price for milk and butter and cheese. And this is our starting line, you know, good, bad, or indifferent. We're starting here. And, you know, that's exciting. The industry has changed rapidly from a policy standpoint. You know, electrical generation was the first phase in the state, as Steve was saying, and that was subsidized by power purchase agreements from the utilities that used that as part of their renewable portfolio standard. So when they were able to fill that with solar that became less expensive, wind that became less expensive, hydro from Canada was included, then, you know, this didn't make an economic proposition for the utilities themselves. Our industry pivoted. We've got the renewable natural gas that's guaranteed through 2032. And, you know, we'll watch additional markets open up over time, but some of which you've identified there, Steve. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and I'm excited. I'm excited to address not only supporting the dairy industry with our efforts, but also water quality challenges that we may or may, you know, that we've experienced in the state. We can do this, and the way I like to think about it is, remember back in grade school we had like transparencies with the overhead projector, and they would layer stuff on top of each other. So think about it this way: the state of Wisconsin with the pipelines identified, with dairies laid on top of that, and then we can put the water quality issues on top of that, and then we know where we need to start in the state to be most effective.
Excellent. Good conversation coming up with Jessica. All right, Tauchen, sit up and pay attention now. It's your turn. He is our Assembly Ag Chair, farmer himself, Representative Gary Tauchen joining us. And you are the dude that's spearheading a lot of this carbon sequestration conversation. And Gary, you and I have talked many times, monetizing this, all these wonderful things that we can do, we are doing, we will be doing, monetizing it and making sure that a farmer ends up with a fair share in that process. You're working on it. Give us an update. I know you're in Madison because we're still putting the pedal to the metal trying to get some things done. What do we need to know about your efforts when it comes to the carbon credit discussion?
Yeah, we've been working on this project for about a year now, and I've been working pretty closely with Tim Bay from the University of Wisconsin and Jessica and Bob Welch. They're kind of like the executive committee that I've been working with. But we recognize that we're either involved or we'll take what's given to us. So it's a lot better to be on the front end of this project than the back end. And but it isn't just the four of us, because we recognize that the only way that we can move a project this big forward, and initially I called it the digester project, but it's much more than that. So we gave it a fancy name now. It's called the Wisconsin Agriculture Carbon Energy Water Initiative. And the reason that I'm so interested in this is it just has so much potential, and it's all interconnected. We could pull pieces out and probably have moved them this session, but if we pretty much ran out of time, because tomorrow session will end, and in order to have hearings and substitute amendments and all that, it takes more time than what we had. But you'll have people that we pulled in. I've got the chairs, because this is my last session, I've got the chairs of agriculture in the Assembly and Senate. I've got the chairs of natural resources in the Assembly and Senate, chair of the environment, chair of energy and utilities involved, because I plan on working on this project for the next, well, they're going to be paying me for another 10 months, so by golly. I'll certainly be doing that, this special project and a couple others that I've got an interest in. Plus, I really do think this is a generational thing, but I'm planning on working on it for at least 2 years so that we get it off the ground. But so from a legislative standpoint, we pulled those people in. We also pulled in a lot of industry leaders and started some working groups with between 5 and 10 people. And so that covers on-site and distributed energy, biogas in the pipeline, carbon offset labeling and accounting, nutrient management and water. So you can see that Jessica is chairing the Wisconsin Biomass Energy Coalition, and that group has taped videotaped most of the working group get-togethers, and we've also had, this is the third presentation we've given. We gave the presentation at Dairy Business Association and Renew, and now you, and there's others that are interested in this. So we're really looking forward to what we can do. We also put out a request for comment for 60 days, similar to what the Public Service Commission does, so that we can get their input and some direction. We also had a drafter draft some legislation. We recognize that it wasn't ready for prime time, but you've got to start somewhere, and it gives us something to work from. I'm expecting in the next few weeks that we're going to have a hearing on it so we can get some input and some direction from people that are affected to see what needs to be changed in the bill and how we can improve it. So that's kind of the very short presentation that will get us off the ground here.
Okay, I just want to remind people, if you've got questions, we're on a pretty quick tempo here. So if you've got questions, just try to get my attention, please, and we'll yield the floor to whomever you want to speak with. If you are not already familiar with the people that Gary cited, Jessica's at the front, Bob Welch is right here, and Tim Bay is also along with us, who's been really major partners with Gary on trying to work this through. Reason I say that is, let's face it, you took the time to be here, you're going to be in this conversation. It pays to know who you're standing next to in the hallway or standing in line for a sandwich with. You might want to chat with those people when it comes to these projects. Gary, who's ahead of us, and what gives you the biggest fits trying to put more of these pieces together for the monetizing side?
Well, I'd say the four of us are leading the charge, but we can't do it we have to have a lot of help. This is a huge project. And we have been not going at the speed of light, but at a very methodical pace so that we bring people along without causing a lot of heartburn and upheaval. So we recognize that there's some significant changes that need to happen with the energy utilities, in the energy utilities area, working with the PSC, and the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection's also going to have a significant role in, especially when it comes to the carbon. So I'm looking forward to working with the agencies to try to figure out how we can work together to make good things happen for the people in our state, developing a voluntary market-driven program.
Okay. All right, I'll pause and let you catch your breath on that. Randy, let's talk a little bit about where we've already been. For more than a decade now, farmers have already been trying to do what's right by the environment for water quality, nutrient management. We call them farmer-led watershed groups. We've had land conservation involved in planning. give us a little bit of an update on what we've already accomplished. You know, if we're going to find a market for carbon credits, maybe we've already got some of this in our bank on the farm, so to speak. Like I said, farmers have already made some dedicated efforts to try to accomplish these things on their own.
Absolutely, and I can say that this is really current information because Sarah Walling, our administrator from the Division of Ag Resource Management, just came from the Producer-Led Watershed grant workshop this morning. And that's where we were sitting down talking to and listening to the success stories that some of these groups have had. So for those who aren't familiar with what it is, a Producer-Led Watershed grant program requires there to be a pocket of farmers that agree to get involved with the program. They'll also have external partners or governmental partners, whether it's DNR, extension, maybe a local conservation group, county conservation office, to work together to, it's on the ground. I mentioned this in my intro. We're going to start with the ground. It's on the ground where they start looking at soil conservation, nutrient management issues, soil erosion, water quality improvements, which has added layers of benefits. So I'm going to, extend it beyond the topic of it's on the title, but just say that the efforts that they're putting in place, these are neighbors working with neighbors, farmers working with farmers on what works in their backyard to conserve soil and improve water quality. So what does that look like and why is this important? It looks different no matter where you are in the state of Wisconsin. So if you're up here in the karst topography of Wisconsin, something might work better than others. If you're in the central sands, maybe it's a little different story. The rolling hills, coulees, and valleys of western Wisconsin, there could be a different approach that could be used there. So this is why this is such a great program and why we've seen such an embracement of this program, and that means Governor Evers is supportive, the legislature has been supportive, and it's all because we can show that there have been notable, measurable improvements. So want me to run the numbers right now? I wrote them down so I make sure I got them. So these farmer-led groups working with their county conservation staff and other partners have made measurable improvements. And here's a few things that I wanted to reference. So between 2019 and 2020, producer-led watershed groups, there was an 82% increase in reported conservation practices implemented by those groups across the state. That means they're finding things that they should be doing and they're doing them. Point number two, there was a 19% increase in cover crop acres planted. That resulted in more than 75,000 tons of soil and 41,000 pounds of phosphorus on farm fields. So think about that. This is why I keep saying it happens on the ground, because that soil conservation effort and again, keeping phosphorus on the land instead of having it run away, that not only affects the farmer's bottom line, these are the kinds of things that affect our environment and our climate, things that farmers care a great deal about. So those are measurable improvements. Now, there are also practices that are being done that help the bottom line, help soil and water health, but they also get to this carbon sequestration issue that Representative Tauchen was just talking about. And things like no-till and cover crop practices, which are becoming more and more engaged. Groups in the program have achieved a modeled reduction of nearly 40,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents in 2020. Now, if you think about that, that's comparable to greenhouse gas emissions. And if you want to, all right, Randy, what does that mean? So that's the equivalent of 8,700 passenger vehicles driven for 1 year. That's something that we can point to and say, there's something that agriculture is doing, that farmers are doing collectively that is making a difference, both soil and water health, and in this particular case, carbon sequestration. Now, we get these other conversations, and it's a tougher topic that Representative Tauchen's working on. He's talking about monetizing carbon credits. I know Governor Evers set up a climate change task force, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was a carbon credit pilot program. There was also a recommendation to come up with a biodigester pilot program that the governor eventually put into his budget as well. those are all things that kind of speak to the different levels of engagement that we all can have in pointing successes like this, talking about what that means on the ground and what it can mean for monetizing some of these additional benefits.
Right, you know, those are the kinds of numbers that will help spread the word of success from watersheds. But let's be honest, we've been down this carbon credit path before. It was the panacea, fantastic answer for agriculture 10 years ago, and then everything fell apart. Snake bit is the way I might describe some farmers that we are going to need to try to get engaged in the process. Sarah, you're out there talking with them, and I know the farmers you deal with call a spade a spade. They are very direct. What questions do they have about this whole conversation? Now recognize, we know that agriculture is going to be called on to document a sustainability. We've always said it better to lead than to have to follow. What kinds of questions do they ask you when it comes to things like cover crops? This is a long-term play for them. We can't just turn and burn, and these carbon credits aren't just generated by one thing. What do they ask you? Do they think this is a bunch of malarkey?
Where's my return? You know, where's my bottom line? What's in it for me? You know, and trying to educate them that it's not a one and done. It is, you know, this is a long-term process. And so with some of the financial work we are doing, last year was our first, you know, when you say you got to start from somewhere, our first run at identifying the farms that we are currently working with that are implementing those no-till, the farms we identified for implementing a conservation practice for those that were putting in no-till, cover crop, or doing strip-till practices. And so we wanted to look at them and say, how are they doing financially compared to, we're going to just say, the traditional group. And so that was our first look. We didn't have enough good data because we started a little too late to actually be able to do the enterprise analysis to see the corn that was grown in cover crop versus the soybeans, et cetera. We're in the process right now of gathering that data, so hopefully we have some good numbers for, you know, a first year look of the enterprise side. So that's hopefully going to continue to go down that, you know, we're going to gather more data, but honestly the farmer wants to know what is in it, what's my bottom line, where's my return, because they're ultimately running a business.
Okay, what do ag lenders have to say about this? You want to talk about return, and thinking about this year, I just got my crop insurance quote. I need a bottle tucked in my office apparently for this. I mean, ag lenders.
You could protect there, so yes.
What do you think? I mean, what are ag lenders telling you about this?
You know, they want to see whether the numbers look like, what is that return? I mean, they're looking at, in every position, every farm's, depending on their size and their financial, you know, where they stand. You know, the bankers are asking lots of questions too, like, okay, what is the risk? What's the reward? Where's, you know, what's the
And you're going to be giving up revenue at least somewhere in this transition.
What's the long picture look like? Yep.
So now that we've kind of covered those bases, now let's uncork the technology side. Because again, I'm fascinated to know, we've talked a lot about cover crop land practices. But let's face it, we've got a whole lot of cows, and we've just been recently criticized about not having enough land to be able to manage that manure properly. I beg to differ, but that's not the point. Tell me about the technology, Steve. Keep going, and Jessica, you jump in where you can, but educate me on the amazing things that can be done given one farm, let alone a collective group of farms that will centrally locate and move nutrients to for a process that's well beyond just the digester. I mean, I'm intrigued with the revenue sources that I'm hearing about. Help educate us, help us more to understand what we've got to tell the growers that could participate, what we've got to help lenders understand, because it's an investment.
Sure. And the lenders are very interested in it. I spent an afternoon about 2.5 months ago with one of the largest ag lending banks in Wisconsin with their loan officers and their board, and similar to this, they had a lot of questions, and of course they were interested in their customers for ag lending and what they should be doing. So it is going on. So as an engineer, I will tell you that every water cleanup system, and let's start with the city of Appleton, okay, human waste, industrial waste, it's a multi-step process. I mean, it doesn't go into one building and it comes out clean water. It does not work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't work that way. and we've been cleaning up municipal waste and so on for a long time. As engineers, we haven't really got that done in one step. And we all know we spent a lot of money at that in municipalities that we don't have maybe in the ag industry. Okay? So the money's there and we still haven't gotten it done as an engineer, picking on myself a little bit. So it's a multi-step process and you keep breaking it down. It's kind of like the farmer saying, well, I got a mastitis problem. Well, it isn't generally one thing, you gotta keep looking for a solution to get it all the way down. So what a digester really does, it's a first step. Not the last step, it's the first step. It's maybe the big gorilla, takes care of all the heavy work, but it is still a first step. And it breaks down long chain organic compounds, not gonna be technical here, but it breaks it down into biogas. And I view that biogas as the waste product from those bugs. Figuratively, that gas comes out of that individual bacteria's butt end and it floats to the top of the surface. That's how you can look at it. Okay. Now, what always comes up in groups like this is, what about the nutrients? Our gas is CO2, carbon and oxygen, and CH4, carbon and hydrogen, a little bit of H2S, very small, hydrogen and sulfur, no NPK. There's no NPK in the gas. That NPK is still in the liquid, doesn't leave. So what the farmer is looking for fertilizer value, it doesn't go up in the air, it stays in the liquid. And all kinds of testing data on it, but that's the way it is. However, it's changed. It's gone through a process called mineralization. It went from being organic fertilizer to inorganic fertilizer. And Tim's shaking his head back there because now he's a scientist in the group. So if I say anything wrong, I'm sure he'll shoot me. But it goes into from organic to inorganic stage. And in the inorganic stage, it's plant accessible through the root system. Raw manure, grandfather told me on the farm, you spread that manure too thick, and you're gonna kill the alfalfa, and it's gonna run off. And he was right. Maybe he didn't know why he was right, but he was right, okay? Today we know why he's right for the technical reasons, is because we went from organic stage to inorganic stage, and roots can use it as inorganic stage. So we now have a fertilizer that's much more accessible, will not burn the crop. You can put it on in the summertime. It's not worrying about burning the crop. And you have a lot less risk of running off if we put the manure or fertilizer on in the summertime, as we all know. You go to a lot of our customers, and October 1st, those lagoons are empty. Not full, they're empty, because they used it up all summer. What is the value of that from an environmental runoff standpoint? Huge problem, huge advantage that you got rid of that problem. The other thing that we also see is, one of the things that biodegrade in a digester very easily, very short chain molecule, very easy for us to do, is we get rid of starches. Sugars and starches biodegrade real easy, give us most of our biogas, the energy. But the starches cause us a lot of problems in water treatment. They're slimy, they stick. Think about the starches that you add to your soup or your gravies if you're cooks, and they bind everything together. Well, we biodegrade those. So if you take the manure that I grew up with and you got it on your hand, it stayed there the rest of the day, right? Because you couldn't get it off. Not true with digestive manure because it doesn't have those starches that sticks to your hand anymore. Why the cows that are bedded on the bedding, people remark all the time, well, those cows are clean, the flanks are clean. Well, it's because the manure doesn't stick to the flanks. We didn't eliminate the manure, it just doesn't stick anymore. It also doesn't blind over the soil. So when you spread manure and you get a liquid manure on, kind of thick, you notice it starts to run because you blinded the soil. We don't blind the soil over here. We don't have the starches. It soaks in a lot better. Okay. Gotta be a little careful on tile lines, but it is still an advantage to be doing that. So we have some advantages in that. The other thing is if we take the starches out, we now have options available to us for secondary treatment. We separate the solids. Solids go back for the bedding. When you separate the solids, we take out 20-25% of the phosphorus, reduce it from the manure loading because it goes back to the bedding. We go to the step after that, we go to a very simple system, been out forever. Packerland's had it since the 70s, I can tell you that, because I worked there in it. But you go to a DAF system like a lot of farmers are going to now, we can put in a solids pile 90% of the phosphorus. Doing it all day long. 90% of the phosphorus is in this pile. That also means the liquid's only got 10% of the phosphorus left in it. So solids are generally pretty easy to dispose of. We can manage them real easy. Liquids have historically been the problem on the farm. Now we got 10% of the phosphorus left to it. Doesn't burn. State of Wisconsin going to tell you can put a lot more gallons per acre if you got your phosphorus down to meet your winter management plan. That's fine. People now that are putting on, in the summertime, 70 to 80,000 gallons per acre of DAF liquid coming off it because the phosphorus loading is so low. You can manage that a lot easier, and you put it on when the crop can use it. I can tell you we have a lot of studies, cut first crop hay, put this low phosphorus liquid on, 27,200 gallons per acre is an inch of rain, by the way. You put on your 25,000 gallons in one shot, you've got crop regrowth after first crop that you've never had before. What's the value of that? And you manage your nutrients.
Right. Well, and that's going to be the
Managed it.
That's obviously the salvo and the major reason why we're talking about this sustainability play. How am I going to sell it? Jessica brought up the PSC, the regulators, and all that kind of stuff. I understand that they right now are in a critical play just to get us going. But I think the farmer in me says, I don't trust them. What about the free market? What about those byproducts? Who's going to buy those byproducts? I don't want to just be selling to the grid because you said yourself, it changes on a whim. If I'm going to go in for the long play, how does the free market approach all these byproducts? And will they be able to buy it, or is there a great difference? Help me understand who my buyers are aside from utilities.
Well, we have in this state and in other states, we have a lot of people with digesters that have a lot of cows. Maybe not enough land in some ways. We don't have that 1.5 acres per cow in a lot of situations. But they take out their solids, sell surplus bedding to other dairy farmers. You know that's happening in the state all over. They're selling surplus bedding to other dairy farmers. Along with that, they're selling little phosphorus, little nitrogen, and so forth. They're selling separated solids off of a DAF unit, which is it's a solid. You handle it with a payloader, not with a pump. But you sell those based on nutrient value. One of the largest dairies in this state for 15 years has been selling their lagoon water based on 50% of the co-op value of the nitrogen. And they've been doing that, like I said, 15 years. They have a waiting list for it. Because the people that are buying it can put it on their first, second, third crop alfalfa. They can irrigate it. We got the solids out, they can irrigate it through center pivots and put it on with nozzles. You can go down to our largest installation, not to mention names, but you can go down to Fair Oaks, Indiana, 44,000 cows in one spot. You want to have that in Wisconsin? 44,000 cows in one spot. We've got 10 dairies there. I'm happy to say I've got digester in all 10. And if you go down to Fair Oaks, Indiana, in July, all those center pivots, sandy ground, it's brown water, people. And they're putting on growing crops.
And you can't smell it.
And they're getting their fertilizer value back, they're getting their regrowth back, and that's where it's going. And that's the way it's going as far as you can sell it, you can value it, and they're taking their separated solids, which are really high in phosphorus. And they're surrounded by people who are 100% cash farmers, and they're selling those nutrients in that solid form. And wouldn't you rather buy nutrients that have a little carbon with it and a little natural, all the other organic with it than buying straight from the co-op where it's a mined fertilizer? I'm a farmer, I'd rather do it that way.
Yeah, well, especially this year. Questions? Don't forget, catch my attention. I apologize if I've been focused on the panel, but if you've got a question, just please either speak up or catch my attention. Yeah.
So these terms like carbon tracking or carbon credit, is that like proposing in the state, having some form of what was proposed years ago, I guess it'd be at a national level of cap and trade? When you say that, is that along the same lines, or what does that mean?
No, this is Gary. This will be a free market voluntary program. Cap and trade is regulatory. as long as it's voluntary and free market, we can move it. I don't believe we can move anything that would be required.
Okay.
Let me add one thing to that, and I'm not an attorney by any means, but my understanding of it is that one of the reasons that Wisconsin can sell our CNG natural gas put in the pipeline to California is that it's not a law in Wisconsin, we have to do that. If we would make it a law in Wisconsin that we had to do that, California would not accept it. That's my understanding.
There's logic.
Bob, am I right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So the fact that it's a voluntary basis makes a huge difference selling it into California. Just letting you know that. Certainly not a legislator, not an attorney.
No, that's just it. We're all trying to maneuver these
Right.
conversations. Unfortunately, some of us have some history on this, and I think that's partly what's getting in the way. Jessica, talk to me a little bit more about that history. You know, when Steve and I sat down and talked, that's one thing that I think we really have to work with on policy development, and that wipe the memory of those digesters of the past almost off the radar because of the technology we're talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, when digesters first started coming up in the state, sort of at a regular basis, I think maybe the farms weren't at the center of the conversation. We needed the manure for the digester to operate. The role of the farm itself, I don't think played the role that it should have. And what I mean by that is everything that happens on the farm impacts the way a digester works. If a farm beds on sand or fiber, if a farm empties its lagoon multiple times a year, that can now, with the RNG market, affect the CI score. How far is manure trucked to the fields on which it's spread? All this stuff. What's the volume of the manure? You know, so all these little data points are super, super important to understand and can significantly influence a project. This is something we didn't know back when we first started. The other piece of it too is that manure has value now, and farms are being paid, you know, anywhere from, I don't know, Steve, 0.5 cent to 3 or 4 cents a gallon for their manure, depending on their carbon intensity score. So, you know, that has actual value now. And then the business model just keeps shifting with more technology and more data and more information. We just need to keep reassessing how we approach this market. But at the center of it is making sure that your client, who is the farm, is happy.
So, how much conversation's been going on with the big players that are driving the sustainability push? McDonald's, Walmart's, Kroger's, name your food source. I mean, what I'm hearing is they're going to drop the hammer on their suppliers to bring that verified, documented, traceable sustainability story to them before they'll even allow them to bid a project to be involved in a supply situation. Mm-hmm. Is this urban myth, or are you involved in those kinds of very conversations?
I'm not involved in those conversations, but that is absolutely true. All those large corporations have environmental sustainability governance goals, and this is coming from shareholders and consumers that they want to know what the carbon footprint of the product they're purchasing is, and that has value. So that's going to start coming from the purchasers all the way down to the producers. They'll want to know what their carbon intensity score is per 100 weight of milk.
Well, that's what CI, carbon intensity. I didn't know what CI was.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Randy?
Can I break in? So that's one of the things we want to do is have maybe a 2-day conference workshop to meet with the organizations, Nestle, and the vendors and grocers, and find out exactly what they want and why they want it, so that we can utilize that information to build a program that's viable for the farmers in the state of Wisconsin.
You're gonna invite me, Gary?
Pardon?
You're gonna invite me?
Absolutely.
I have witnesses now. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, sure. Based on that comment, what I wanted to do is just kind of jump in on the sustainability and who's paying attention to it. And it goes beyond our borders. I'm not going to get deep into this topic, so Jeff, a conversation for another day, international trade. But this same visibility that some of these big players seem to have at the national level, like tell me how sustainable your product is, that's also an experience in the global marketplace too. Now, as we put to use some of the funds that our state has, our agency has, to get more Wisconsin products out into the international marketplace, some of those other countries are saying, show me, tell me how sustainable that product is developed, and that tells a story about, you know, how we're doing things here too. So it goes beyond our borders, and it can be a benefit for us.
You had a question?
Wow, what are the factors in the carbon intensity score? How do you know, a farmer's going to ask, maybe everybody knows this in question to answer. You said half a cent to 4 cents. Well, that's a big difference. How do you get to the 4 cents?
Yeah, all that is analyzed by organizations that actually have like the formulas. They will look at how much propane did you use on your farm that year? You know, do you do cover crops? You know, do you have a digester? How many times a year do you empty your lagoon? How far do you truck your manure to apply it to fields? So a whole ton of factors by people who are way smarter than me factor into that. And then the carbon intensity score is created. Part of the program that Gary is championing and we're supporting will allow farms to, if they choose to upload all the information that we're seeking, and then we would respond, here's your current carbon intensity score for your milk. And then if you implement these practices, this is what could happen. So it gives farms the ability to make a better judgment on an investment.
Yeah, I read through it last week. You gave me a copy.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess that was unclear for me. Maybe it's, just didn't understand the lingo. Okay, thank you.
All the way in the back?
Yeah, this is Jeff again. As an organizer, I'm going to ask this question. What about, in the topic, we talk about climate change, right? And so bigger rain events impact farmers, impact waterways. I think, Jessica, you brought up, water protection. There's been a lot of, conversation and, in the legislature about drinking water contamination of wells. And I'm wondering how, what's the future of sustainable farming and impacting and protecting those waterways and the drinking water that people get from wells?
So we can't change anything that's already gone on. We can, however, implement additional practices or incentivize, through generation of these carbon credits, the interest in adding additional practices to help our water quality challenges. So if you've ever been past a lake in the summer and it's got some algae on top, that is oxidized phosphorus. So that is, phosphorus that has gotten into the water, the sun hits it, and then we get this really luscious green mat on top of our lakes. So these are things that we can help reduce. And, we've also learned over time that topography and what kind of bedrock we sit on influences things. It's just additional information we get over time. So I think,
Well, the biodigesters play a role in that. I was going to say,
Yeah, for sure.
Steve talked about separating the phosphorus, and it's the phosphorus runoff that's creating some of these visible problems.
Yeah. So one other thing that they didn't mention is that the bacteria that we have that causes us as humans problems, E. coli, strep, staph, dairy industry, Klebsiella, one of the major causes of mastitis. Those bacteria are all aerobic bacteria. They live in our environment. They live on my hand, they live on this table, we talk about them all the time. kind of why humans get sick, because we're aerobic, this is an aerobic digester, okay? Big as it is, it's still aerobic. But the anaerobic digesters, which are animals that actually can eat more complex foods that we can eat. I mean, if you think what a cow eats, or a buffalo eats, or an elk or a deer, they eat a lot of things that you and I can't eat. And so I consider them actually a little more sophisticated stomach, that's my opinion, but they have a different type of bacteria, and anaerobic bacteria can digest things that you and I cannot digest with aerobic bacteria. Long and story short is that if you take manure from that hit the ground, cow manure, hog manure, doesn't make any difference, human manure, and you put it in a digester, aerobic bacteria can live about 12, 14 days and kind of figuratively hold their breath and they'll come out okay. Hard to believe, but it's like I can swim and hold my breath for a minute, but they can hold their breath for 12 to 14 days. After that, they're pretty well done, and we actually will convert them into more biogas, those aerobic bacteria. So when a well-run digester, 25 days or whatever retention time you want to have, you can get, we have a lot of data, you can get zero detect on aerobic bacteria. You will get zero detect coming out of cow manure on Klebsiella, E. coli, strep staph. It doesn't exist anymore. What would you rather put on your ground? Digested manure would be good, or raw manure would be good, for the same reason. So if it runs off, you don't have that problem in the lakes where, because your BOD requirement takes the oxygen and causes the fish kills. Doesn't happen, same runoff. So that's an advantage. Doesn't get talked about a lot, but that is a huge advantage.
Isn't there a water byproduct from the system too that ends up ultimately being cleaner, better? There's systems that are working, the potable water that comes off can go right back in the lake.
Right. You can go to another step after DAF, and there's people doing in this state, not a lot, but it's starting to happen, where you can go through membranes and you can drink the water. I'm drinking processed cow manure water. Goes through enough systems. We send up all those astronauts. We don't send all that water up with them, by the way. Think about it. We don't send up 55-gallon barrels of water. Think about it. Okay, that's enough.
Did you have something to take that?
That's gonna be hard to
follow.
I'll do my best. All right, so back to Jeff's question. So Jeff, you kind of broadened it back out to climate change. It's a big topic, even bigger than just, some of the topics we've been teasing out today. The good news is, while Representative Tauchen has got a task in front of him, I'm going to say it. So you don't have to plow all the ground. I know we're supposed to be talking about that, no-till, but you don't have to plow all the ground, because you've had the benefit of, the Speaker's Water Quality Task Force covered some of the soil and water concepts that we're talking about here. The Governor's Climate Change Task Force hit on some of those issues that you were talking about, Jeff. So it starts with land and soil and water conservation, erosion controls, focusing on what Jessica was saying is, what can we do? Sarah hears this from me all the time as a state agency. What can we do? What can we do on the land? So that's where some of these things come from. So Representative Tauchen doesn't have to pave as much ground. I don't know. Not any better. But so to that issue, obviously there's the carbon sequestration components, there's the biodigester feasibility that we're talking about. Those were things that were teased out as part of the Governor's Climate Change Task Force. Those are important concepts to be talking about. Along with, again, I go back to the beginning, the soil and water stuff, which does help with that carbon sequestration that we're talking about, whether you're talking about cover crops or other. An investment, I know, but it's something that we should be talking about. And I swear I'm not just doing this because our friends at Farm Bureau are sponsors to this, but you can even say that I said it, because he said at some point we could. But Robert Knight, the 3rd District 3 board member from Wisconsin Farm Bureau, was one of the people who was on Governor Evers' Climate Change Task Force. And I'll just say this because he was covering the whole watershed, as it were. Wisconsin farmers are proud of the continuing efforts to use climate-smart practices, including involvement in producer watershed groups, planting cover crops, utilizing no-till and reduced tillage of fields. They've been at the forefront of flood and erosion control, protection, and preservation of water quality, and other innovations that protect the environment. That gets to that sustainability, adaptability, and how what farmers are doing on the ground relates to climate change and what they can do. So please pass along my regards to Robert.
ahead.
And let him know that his good words live on.
Go ahead.
Now you start talking about, talking to loan people as far as feasibility and all this stuff. We've got a cable in our township. I talked to them last fall and they said they were gonna be hauling about 6 loads a day, both ways to, I forget exactly, it was about 20 miles, and they're gonna be getting paid for this. And now you're talking about, showing profits and all this. Is there any subsidy in this right now? I know a lot of like your wind and solar stuff, there's subsidies out there for that. Is there subsidy in this, or is this actually making a profit that can justify paying out these, making it a profitable operation?
From what I understand, and Jessica, you guys can correct me, the incentives right now are primarily driven through PSC, and they're all going towards solar big time right now.
Yeah.
But to the best of my knowledge, unless somebody can correct me, there's no skin in the game by anybody else except the guys that are like Gary trying to get the foundation built and out in the field. Really, I think that's one thing that, they may or may not be able to disclose. It's just like always in agriculture. You've got early adapters that are ready to jump on and see the vision and will put their money in. I know that there's a project by Greenleaf, 13 different farms. They are all in, but that's why I keep asking, where's the payback? Because right now there's no subsidies, there's no golden check out there just because you do it. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But private industry is largely what's driven this so far. And I think I think we're still waiting to see how policy can help guide some of that. But again, I might be mistaken, yeah?
Well, yeah, in our business of digesters from animal waste, which you're talking about, there's really, today, there's no direct subsidies. When we first started putting in 2000, 2010, USDA had 30% cost sharing and things like that. Some quick money, pretty much going away. There is no more 30% from USDA. So we don't have the same program that the wind or the solar has in the United States. However, we have a different subsidy. We now have 4 or 5 states. California is #1, Oregon, Washington, the Northeast, Canada, that are stipulating that you have to have a certain amount of renewable energy in your diesel fuel and your gasoline and so forth, all right? Or they're stipulating that you have to have, California has a gas program where you have to have so much of your transportation fuel being converted from gasoline or diesel fuel to natural gas. And then, so they established a new market. And that new market then also gave a big stimulus for renewable because they got a better CI score, okay, which is a complicated thing, but basically means taking some of the methane out of the air, and you're doing a very good job for carbon sequestration by doing that way, instead of taking that oil out of the ground. So we're not being subsidized by government programs. In California, the state is not paying for those programs. The state in California basically says to the local filling station or the local broker for the gas that goes to the filling station, the BP and the Chevron and the, all those type people, Shell, that you will have so much renewable energy. And they have to go out and buy that in the market. So they established this renewable market by telling these people that they had to have it. Actually, it doesn't cost the state any tax money. They just said, you're gonna do it. It's kind of like if you're a dairy farmer, you're mandatory, you can go check off money. Right. Okay, it's in some ways there. So they established this market, and we're living on that market right now.
Yeah.
So the market is set by a government entity in some ways, not that it costs some money, but everybody fills up their car in California is paying for it.
Good. I got a question over here.
I have a question along those lines a little bit then. Do you guys have an insight? I think Jessica, you had said there's a guaranteed market there until 2032. Is that like kind of the runway right now for what those programs are in California and some other states?
That's just California's number. I don't know the numbers for the other states.
Okay. And then I just had you mentioned, Steve, I think earlier, natural gas markets and, the last 6 months to a year. Does that have any impact on the payback that you get from the gas you put into a pipeline? Like, natural gas 6 months ago was maybe $2 and now it's $4 or $5. Does that kind of price bump up on the market? Does that equal anything, any change in farmer's pocket or any change in your pocket if you're putting that gas into a pipeline, or is it really still kind of a static market for renewable natural gas?
Well, the price of natural gas that comes out of the Texas oil well or North Dakota or whatever, because of the market price is going up, so like you said, it's going up from 2 to 4.5 or whatever it is now, 5 maybe. I think it will keep going up if Ukraine off, Russia shuts it off. That's a whole different thing. But, so that market has gone up, so it's obviously made a difference. However, that market is so small compared to the California demand that it doesn't mean a lot. It's like maybe an extra 3-4% income. So it's not everything adds up. I mean, it's like milk going from $20 to $20.10. It makes a difference, but it's not the big driver. The big driver is still the demand for renewable energy.
Do we have any other questions? I'm respectful of the clock. I know people got things going on. Follow up? Yep.
So on what you're talking about, that market, that the gas companies or whatever were forced to put money toward it. So is that the government mandated those or regulated those gas companies to invest in renewable energy, and that money all got put into a pot that's run by an organization, I suppose, or created or whatever, for renewable? So is that what you're talking about there?
No, I don't think it's, maybe your answer is not even. It isn't really that the California said that, let's call British Petroleum, BP, one of the big ones. It isn't that they said that British Petroleum has to invest in renewable energy, because they're really not doing that much in the marketplace. They just told them that you have to have a certain percentage of the product you sell have. But if you put all your manure in a lagoon and you really never clean that lagoon out to the bottom, and because the lagoon becomes anaerobic. And we've all seen that little bubbles coming out of that lagoon. Well, those are the methane that we're talking about that we don't want to get up there. So that's one of, I mean, there's a reason why California's doing what they're doing. And so if you have a CI score for a dairy, an average CI score, I tell you maybe like a -250, which doesn't mean a lot. But that also means roughly that 3 million BTUs equals 1 ton of CO2 emissions, correct?
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, I would tell you right now that on a new site, depending on how close you are to a pipeline to put it into, I mean, if you got to go truck it, versus a pipeline, and there's a lot of variables here. But I would say an average return on investment, a simple EBITDA return on investment is probably less than 4 years.
Oh, I was not expecting that fast.
Less than 4?
I was probably, my mind was 10 to 20.
We're seeing that all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I have a question just with this CI score. Is this a standardized, is it across the nation, across the world? And are the numbers that are going into it, are they dynamic? Are they going to keep changing? Or is this science, like this is this value, this is this value? Or will those numbers maybe change over time or?
Well, if you look at California's value right now for, let's call it their CI score, their value for LCFS credits, versus Oregon, California's maybe 10-15% higher than Oregon, simply the way they value it. But Oregon,
every state is valuing
it's a little bit different. Not every state has it, of course. Overseas, some of them would value it more than the United States. The United States does not lead the world in this by any means. I don't want people to think I would tell you, in my opinion, humble as it is, that we're behind the rest of the world, okay? But I don't see that California's model, which is mimicked by Oregon's model, they just value it a little different. It's kind of based on science. which is better than based on voodoo. So I mean, just as an engineer, I like science better than that. So it is what that is, and there's some reasons why they're doing it.
Yeah, well, like you said, this is,
Yeah.
there's a
There is
there's a lot
actually
of
some science.
Tim?
You asked a great question, and I love that your first response is, what's the farmer's question? Is what's in it for me? And that's probably the biggest takeaway of the Tauchen initiative, because the Tauchen initiative recognizes two big things that's going on in the world. One is the ESG market, the environmental society governance. It's corporate market. It's the carbon accounting market. That is huge. And there's two agencies in the country that are going to chime in on what that means at farm level. One's the SEC. And the Securities and Exchange Commission is in the process right now of evaluating all these ESG claims of corporations, because there's concern that there's all this greenwashing going on. So what they're looking at doing is standardizing the reporting that the Nestle's and the Krafts and the Walmarts all have to do, so that it's transparent and it can be traced back to the farm. But the real issue is the farm's going to be asked to run two sets of books. One set of books is a financial set of books. So that's the financial accounting. The second part is the carbon accounting. So that all of these programs and standards and criteria don't make a lot of sense at the farm level unless they can sync their financial accounting in with this carbon accounting stuff and have it all make sense. To Pam and Gary's point, how do you monetize it? One of the most important roles the state and USDA can have is putting in these standards and these databases, so if I change a practice on my farm, I can run the numbers and pencil out what the financial implications are. But I also need guidance and standards on the carbon implications of that change. Because I gotta make a choice. I got a limited budget. And I want to consider making some changes because Nestle's my buyer. And they're telling me I got to do this carbon accounting. And if I'm going to manage my carbon, I got to know what my returns are. So do I pursue a digester? Do I look at going from my conventional till to no-till? Do I get out of tillage altogether, sell it to my neighbor, and focus on something else? Do I put a solar array on my milking farm? Do I go to my co-op and place a 10,000 gallon order for biodiesel to reduce the carbon footprint of my harvest this fall? I got all kinds of different decisions to make. I gotta have a basis. And that's what Gary's program is primarily about, is developing a carbon accounting, state-sanctioned, easy-to-use program at the state level, and then enhanced tools like Steve and Jess have talked about today, about the digesters that make it easier, make it simpler, make it more straightforward. So my long response to this is the database is the way government really fosters this market, free market adaptation, is to give confidence to everybody that if I'm going to be running two sets of books, I got to know what those conversion factors are in my carbon accounting. And what will the SEC accept? This is, frankly, believe it or not, this is where Wall Street touches big community. It's those standards.
Well, it's not going to get any easier. I don't think any of us believe this is going to get any easier, because I know there's places in the world where it's not just about the carbon credits. They will go into a market and specifically want a nutrient, a mineral, a something. So it's not going to get any easier, like you said. Go ahead. Who had somebody had?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity, whatever, but 7, 8 years ago, Walmart, obviously one of our largest retailers in the world, announced their gigaton of carbon CO2 savings. They had big publicity. And I was fortunate enough I got invited to go down to Bentonville, Arkansas for that opening. Okay. Well, and not picking on Walmart, it's not my intent, but the upshot of the industry was they had their biggest 250, 350 suppliers in this huge room, okay? And I was one of them that wasn't that, but I was there. And they came along and they basically said, all right, we're gonna save a gigaton, which I can't even imagine what a gigaton is, by the way, but a gigaton of CO2, and Procter & Gamble, you're gonna save this much, GBS, you're gonna save this much, local cheese company, you're gonna save this much, and you're gonna save this much, and at the end of the day, it added up to a gigaton.
Yep.
Okay? They didn't change all their light bulbs, they just said, okay, and I'm sitting there, and I'm just a farm boy engineer, and I'm sitting there, geez, what is this? You know, that's what it was. And I can tell you, I know that some of the new milk products that are going into Walmart today have to come from dairy farms or digesters. Because the cheese plant and the milk plants are telling Walmart that I'm meeting my criteria for CO2 savings because we're buying this product from these people. And that's happening today. And if you don't realize that as a dairy farm in Wisconsin, you're maybe in trouble a little bit. But that is what's happening. And you also know that Google and all the Amazon, all these nice buildings they're building, they want 100% renewable power. They don't even want certificates. They want 24 hours a day knowing that that power that they're buying is renewable. Not that it was made in January and used in February. They want it 24 hours a day. And there's a big part of our economy. Don't underestimate how many dollars they have.
That's correct. Kurt?
So yeah, Pam, thanks. Along that line, talking about consumer preference, a couple weeks ago, I was at the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives annual meeting, and we actually had a presenter come in, and this was a little bit mind-blowing to me, maybe shows my age a little bit, but the newer generations of consumers, and this probably, from my assertion, is a little bit more coastal maybe than Midwestern, but the newer generations of consumers, they actually showed us there's some apps they can put on their phone. And while they're walking through the store, they can be looking up particular products or vendors or companies, and they can get an environmental score, a social score, and a governance score. And this group of consumers is actually making decisions on which product they're buying from which company based on how some of these scores are, which is important to these consumers. And they're willing to spend extra money to support the company they want to support. So there was a lot of takeaways with the group. I think some of the bigger food co-ops that were in there, you know, we need to figure out how to pool our producers and how to tell our story, you know, what practices we're doing to conserve water, what we're doing to produce renewable energy and these kinds of things, and do a better job of promoting ourselves and getting that information on that score, if you will, on those apps so that we can get those.
There's QR codes on a lot of products these days that, as somebody that is unfortunate to live in Madison, I see people in the grocery store that are shooting the QR code and pausing, especially if it's, if there's a selection, a choice, something like that. Yeah, it's very interesting.
To elaborate on his point, I was at I come from a different business, but a different industry, National Home Builders Association.
Yeah.
It's an astonishingly increasing amount of, they don't care about price sometimes, quality. It's just a matter of what your score is.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's part of the reason why Jeff thought this was a good area for us to dabble in. Now, granted, we are coming up on the clock, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Anybody have any other questions for the panel? Now, I mentioned it earlier, you lay eyes on these people because, as you can tell, there's leaders, there's people that are already out there doing a lot of this. If you get yourself into a position where you're looking at a project, you've got questions that you still need answered, at least you see some of the faces behind the industry now that are trying to get those answers. And thanks, Gary, for joining us, buddy. And so we're not going to get anything done this session. So how do we watch this process unfold? What do we do? Where do we go? How do we kind of keep a pulse on this baby?
Well, I think the best way is to follow Biomass Energy Coalition website. As we move forward, as I mentioned earlier, we've been taping and videotaping presentations that we make, and we're going to continue working with the people that have been involved to this point, and I expect to have a hearing within the month to get as much input as we can, and then work with the stakeholders as we move forward, and hopefully have a piece of legislation that the Department of Ag, PSC, and the stakeholders feel comfortable with. So it's just one of those projects that take a long time. I've already had bills that took 4 or 5 years to get through. I'm hoping we can do this one a lot quicker, but it takes a lot of really good people that are interested and involved, and we certainly appreciate all the help we've gotten along the way.
Good deal. Thank you, Gary. Take care of yourself. Thanks for taking time out of your day down in Madison to join us. We appreciate it. Round of applause for Representative Gary. Any final thoughts from anybody in the front as we're up on the deadline here? Let's give our panelists a round of applause. My name is Pam Jahnke. I'm a TV, radio, farm broadcaster from Madison. If you didn't know who the loudmouthy broad in front was before, now you do. Fabulous Farm Babe is my hook if you want to follow us as we try to get a handle on all of these opportunities and revenue streams that potentially are coming away for Wisconsin agriculture. Other than that, please feel free to mix and mingle it. Looks like there's still some nibblies in the back of the room that Jeff paid for, so we might as well take advantage of, and have a safe trip back home wherever that may be. Thank you again for spending the time.